So with cutlery use, there's lots of workarounds. You can serve finger food, or you can pre-cut the food so the person just has to use a fork or a spoon to eat. And in fact, often we're so busy doing those things that we're not giving the person an opportunity to practice these skills themselves, because it's quicker and easier and we're in the habit of doing it ourselves. So I'll go through a few ways that you can teach the person to use a knife and fork together if that's something that they want to. So the first thing to say is the type of cutlery you use makes a difference. So generally flat handled ones are harder to grasp than a more rounded handled one. So that's the first thing to watch out for. If someone is finding it really hard, that they don't have enough strength or power when they're cutting, then sometimes it can actually be helpful if they're safe enough to give them a sharper knife, one that actually has a bit of a serrated edge that'll cut through food a little bit easier and quicker. You can also buy these knives, they're called kiddie cutters, and they have the serrated edge, but it's really not sharp, so even if they did put it on their skin, they wouldn't actually cut through. The other thing just to say about cutlery is that some people actually find it easier to learn to use chopsticks because they're using them just in one hand rather than using a knife and fork, where you're having to use your two sides of your body and your two hands, and each is doing a different action. If you are working on cutlery, then often when people are starting, they'll hold it like this with all of it in their fist. Really normal, it gives them a really strong grasp on the cutlery. So if that's the grasp they need, then go with that. And then a more mature grasp would be that it's kind of hidden in the palm of the hand. And I talk about the bossy fingers being on top because they're telling the fork and the knife where to go. So you can help someone take that grasp as they get stronger. So I'll just go through buttering first of all, and then a bit on cutting. So buttering is easier if you're using a heel or a toasted slice of bread rather than some softer fresh bread. So you're teaching to put the butter or the jam or whatever you're spreading on this part of the knife. So generally people are inclined to kind of dig straight into the butter and just scoop it up. But what you're kind of trying to teach is this, that you kind of smear along. My butter's a bit hard, so you might actually cut in, but basically you want it to be here on this side. I usually use plasticine when I'm teaching cutlery, so that's why you're seeing the bit of green here. So you're showing the person where to hold it as well, that they're holding it at the edge, and then that you start up at the top, and it's almost like you're painting. You're doing strips of it, painting or ploughing, whatever analogy works for the person. And then that it's okay to turn the food so that you can get it into the next place, and that before they spread they have a look and they see where is it needed, because often people get really good at spreading just in the middle, and that's what they keep coming back to. And again, you're showing them the angle of the knife, that if the butter is here on this side, that they're angling it a little bit, so not totally flat and not totally upright, but down a little bit. And when you're holding it in this sort of grasp, it's easier to control the movement. So when it comes to cutting, again, people might start off like this, and generally the writing hand is the one that holds the knife, so that might be swapped over from how I'm doing it if you're left hand dominant. So the fork shows the knife where to go, so the fork basically decides where the cut is. If you're cutting, I'm just going to use bread as an example, but basically the toughest bit to cut is normally where I'd start. So you put the fork in, and then I teach to go backwards, forwards, or push, pull until you get through. And then you move the fork to the next place, push, pull, push, pull, push, pull. Obviously bread is not something we normally cut with a knife and fork, but it's just an easy thing for me to demonstrate on. And ideally I would say practice at your mealtime so that you're actually cutting up the foods that the person is going to be eating, so that it's meaningful for them. And when something is hard, it's a bit much to suddenly launch into using it for the full meal. So what I'd suggest doing is to have a chat and decide whether the child is going to do, say, 5 cuts, or they're going to cut up all their veg, or they're going to use the knife and fork for 5 minutes. Come up with an agreement, something that you're both happy with. Again, it's okay to turn the plate or turn the food to make it easier, and that's another skill to teach. And then you'd go do your bite-sized cuts again. And then the last thing with cutlery is loading. So again, you stab with the fork. Sometimes that's enough. Other times you need the knife to help. The knife pushes it onto the fork, or the fork runs it against the knife like a wall, and then up you come and into the mouth. And just a few things to make eating a little bit easier is to make sure that the plate is under the chin, so that if food drops, it goes down onto the plate rather than onto the clothes, and make sure the person is sitting in near the table, tummy to table.